we're asleep as a society. Um, we're disconnected from each other. We're disconnected from the earth, from the environment. Um, of course, this current crisis doesn't necessarily help because we're not able to be together physically. But we are still able to come together in ways. And I can't imagine going through this without this technology. Um, so a real goal was reconnection, reawakening, realizing that it's not like we need to wake up. We know what it's like to feel connected. We know we've lost our way, I think, in a lot of ways as a human species. And so it's more about reawakening. So the vision, understanding that mental health, trauma, and addiction experiences do not occur in isolation. Reawaken intends to explore the knowledge base and experiential journey of social connection, compassion, and meaningful action. These three themes underpin the spirit and value of the workshops and all other aspects of Reawaken Australia. And so I've got my Reawaken shirt. So as we go through this, we're going to be talking about these themes of connection, compassion, and there's Matt's shirt, compassion and meaningful action. What will it look like? And I'm not going to read through all of this. I'll just tell you about it. We wanted to create a conference that was not your typical conference. We wanted to create a conference that was more about human connection than presentations and knowledge and you go to a presentation and then you leave. This was really more, the Reawaken experience is more of a retreat experience of coming together, connecting. Yes, meaningful action was also a core of it. So we don't just want to have a love fest. We want some real meaningful things to come out of the experience, but we want to have a central focus being connection and compassion for each other. If we can't do that for each other, then how can we do that for the world? And this theme carried right down to the organizers. I think it's a great example, especially during this time where we're all kind of far apart, and it doesn't matter where we are necessarily to connect. We had PJ and I from Massachusetts, US, and then we had Matt Ball and Stephanie Mitchell, who I think is unable to be here today, but as the four core organizers, and they're from South Australia. And we were able to meet every couple of weeks for about a year to plan this. And every meeting that we had was primarily about the relationship and the connection. Yes, we were planning a conference, but the most important thing was that we maintained and we grew closer together as colleagues and friends. If you've ever organized anything, especially a big conference, you know that it can be really super stressful. There is a lot of work involved. It can be easy to just say, we got to focus on the work and kind of get fried and, kind of lose it in a way. And for the organizers to be less about connection and more about, let's just get the job done. I think as we go through the ebook, you'll see that we are able to maintain this connection throughout. So again, the vision was, yes, people are going to learn some things, but it's mostly about the connection. So how can we do that? One way is not have as many people. We wanted to limit this to around 100 people. The second thing was where are we going to do this? Not at a hotel. Pick a retreat center that's nice, that has some outdoor walking spaces. Another part was intentionally having a lot of downtime for people to connect, limiting the time for presentation, and having every presentation be interactive. So even the keynotes were not about talking to you for an hour to impart my knowledge to you. The keynotes were to give some information, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but then have the rest of it be interactive. And we're going to try to do that today. So if you're prepared to just listen, prepare again. We're going to be breaking you all up into groups. You're going to be connecting with each other. And we're going to want to hear from you today. So that's kind of my introduction. Do you guys want to chime in on this first vision, what we were looking at page, and then we're going to get to the ebook?
Sure. I think it's also important to take a quick step back before we keep moving forward with the semantics of the of how this was organized and how the execution went down, because this didn't just materialize out of the ether. We didn't meet Matt and Stephanie on the internet and decide to organize a conference together. So this, the origin story of the conference was, through the film that Oryx and I produced, Healing Voices, which screened on the grassroots all over the world for a couple of years. Matt and Stephanie Mitchell, as the Humane Clinic, were screening partners of the film. So they screened the film Healing Voices in their community, and there were meaningful actions that came out of those film screenings. And I'll let Matt speak more to that and how that unfolded sort of locally and regionally. But we developed a relationship with these colleagues from the other side of the world through this process. And one of our intentions in producing this film was not just for it to be an entertainment product, not just for it to be something that people spent 90 minutes of their life on and then moved on. We wanted there to be meaningful actions that materialized from the production itself, that the movie was a catalyst for action, for change, for progress, for momentum, for people all around the world who are doing this work around, rethinking mental health, rethinking, these issues that are so core to our humanity. So it was through that process that we got connected with Matt and Steph, and Oryx and I had, the film had run its course, I think, to a certain extent in terms of, screening, and we were looking for something next, for something new. And so it was in those conversations that, we, and Matt and Stephanie looking to do something like this conference, that the four of us agreed that a conference like Reawaken would be organized in the spirit of Healing Voices, in the spirit of the social movement that was happening in South Australia, in connection to Matt and Stephanie's work. And so I just wanted to create some context around sort of the genesis of this project or of this conference. And frankly, as someone who experienced it, it feels almost a little cheap to call it a conference. It was more of it felt more like a retreat. It felt more like a spiritual gathering. It felt more like an oasis in a lot of ways than a conference. So, our objective here today is to impart to you a little bit of what we learned as organizers, a little bit about, what went into the space that we created, that I think was very beneficial to many people. And also with the intention that there are elements of this that could help you in your organizing, that could help, this model evolve or materialize in ways that we at the moment can't foresee. So Matt, you want to jump in?
Well, before Matt, can I just say one thing, that we were very intentional about making this conference its own thing, not a Healing Voices conference. So the conference was really about the connection, compassion, meaningful action, bringing people together. Yes, we did show the film. Yes, we did mention that it was inspired by the film. But there, as you can see, there's other films that we've featured as well, which, by the way, I think is also a very cool thing about the experience, was having art and film be a huge central part of it. And then we showed a teaser for Recovering Addiction here. So yeah, Matt, you want to chime in?
Yeah, and look, building on that, we had producers. I mean, PJ was there, but we had Phil, the producer of Crazy Wise, pop in as an interactive session. It was the middle of the night for him, I think, and then we, the Recovering Addiction film that's coming up from PJ's. Well, to have a producer workshopping an upcoming film live at a conference with the retreat with the audience of the conference was quite amazing, and getting feedback on how the film might evolve. So look, there's a couple of things I'd like to say just about the organizing and the setup. Healing Voices, it wasn't a Healing Voices conference, but for me, there was two things that came out of Healing Voices more than anything. One was this social action, this intention to take something that happened in our community. We showed Healing Voices to an audience. We thought there would be 30 to 50 people in 2016, and 150 people turned up and stood in a little church hall in South Australia because there wasn't enough seats. And it was that day that we said, right, we got to do something bigger. And 3 or 4 years later, PJ and Oryx said, could we do something with the momentum? And that was where we went, yeah, let's bring people together, That feels like an important moment, not just for the event that we're talking about, but in South Australian community around mental health, addiction and trauma. Just to set it up, some of the things for me and Stephanie from South Australia, which I know were so powerful. We had no money for this event. We didn't have any sponsors when we started, and we simply said, we're going to do this. And we committed to doing it anyway. Whatever the outcome was, we would do it, except we had one date. And if we didn't feel confident by that date, and it was about 5 months after we started, we had that date where we could cancel it all. But it was never going to be cancelled. We just went for it. And the other things, I suppose, is that 3 weeks out from the event, what had really happened is we'd put a lot of things in place behind the scenes, but what we'd really done is we'd made this relationship between Oryx, PJ, Stephanie and I, where we just trusted each other. We just trusted each other, and we believed there was a need for change. And it sounds a bit evangelical, but it felt like that from our side. There was these two guys who we'd met and got to know. And then it happened where Oryx wasn't able to bring his family, but PJ brought his family out here, and my wife came to the event one day, and my daughter, and so there was this real sense of bringing our work lives and our lived experience lives and our community together, and that was both the success of the event and the spirit on which the event was built. And I don't think there's a better social action in my life than having my children see that daddy going off to work isn't separate from her everyday life. It's real life, that we are a community globally and locally. And my kids wear their Reawaken shirts around the house now. So yeah.
All right, thanks, Matt. And speaking of family, I just got a private chat from my stepmom from Oregon, who's a wonderful social worker, wonderful human being who joined us today. So thank you.
Stepmom.
Hello.
Thanks
Here. Hi, thank you. I'll be back on in a sec with my face.
I see you. Hi, Kate.
I know, it's going away though. I'll be back.
All right, so this ebook, which you can access very easily on the website, and we're going to send you the link for it, is a wonderful way to give you a feel for the conference, which is for the gathering, the retreat, the experience. So we're just going to go through this a bit. to give you a feel for it. This is the cover we came up with. Kangaroo, that's Adelaide, South Australia. And then I like this, how we have the principal organizers in a circle over here to the right. This really kind of exemplifies our experience, and you'll see lots of photos of us in circles.
Can I just say about the contributors, Oryx? I think this is really important. There's one woman in particular who did the editing on this book, Tracy Booth, who was a person who had never been to any form of conference or workshop before, and you know, through her presence became known by everyone, and the legacy of Meaningful Action is that she edited the final copy of the book and became a contributor to the book. So this person that attended the conference then becomes a central and meaningful contributor to the ongoing story of Reawaken. And that was a real spirit of what we were doing. You know, there was a place for everyone to have an equal, meaningful role, it seemed to me.
Yeah, definitely. So we talked about the importance of sponsors, and I think if we could just stop here for a second. If you're thinking of organizing something similar, as Matt said, we came into this with no money to do this, and did experience organizing things like this. Really, this is kind of the first project of this kind that we've undertaken. We had a vision for how this would look and feel, and so we wouldn't have been able to do this without having these sponsors and having some pretty significant contributions from these organizations who, when we presented the idea of Reawaken, they just bought right into it, saying, yeah, this is what we need as society, as humanity, and we want to support it. And so I think we when you look at the photos and you hear about a retreat in Australia, you think, oh, this is probably some elitist thing. No, this is a few people with a vision, with a dream, with no money. PJ's not making a lot of money and doing independent films that challenge the system. We're all just scraping by, and we said, you know, we want to do this, and these sponsors that did have a bit more resources decided they wanted to support us, and so because of that funding, we're able to make the registrations very affordable, for one thing. So, and if people couldn't afford it, we gave out a lot of scholarships so that people could attend from different walks of life. So it ended up being a real good mix of people coming together. And yes, it was at a nice retreat center, but I can't overemphasize the importance of beforehand. And there was a point. I remember there was a cutoff point. If we don't have funding by this date, we're not doing this. And we got to that date, and we got a big funder, and it was like, okay, we're on. So anybody want to comment on sponsors?
Yeah, I think what it reflects is that, you know, there are elements of just conducting business that are, you know, that sort of supersede your ability to do something like this, right? So, you know, again, this was not seeded by a foundation or a private individual, but what we had to do as organizers was get organized around a vision, right? And that includes having a clear statement around what the conference is and what we're trying to do. You know, having an outline of a program of who's participating and having a sense for what the costs are going to be. and also packaging that and going out to the appropriate partners. I mean, Matt and Stephanie did that as the on-the-ground contacts. They were the ones going out in front of these folks in South Australia and in Australia and pitching them. And it's not easy. As someone who has been fundraising for documentary films for almost 20 years now, I mean, selling somebody on a concept is not an easy thing to do. But there are some foundational principles. You have to have a clear vision. You have to have effective materials. You have to believe in what you're selling. You have to believe in, and I think that we all collectively brought a bit of experience, but also a lot of passion to this. And when you're sitting in front of somebody trying to articulate something that only exists on paper, your passion, what you're expressing to them in your body language and in your expressions and in your heart, it's more important than any sales hook you could develop. And so, having a vision, putting pen to paper, being organized around that, and then treating it like a sales effort. And again, Matt said it and Ulrich just said it, but there was a point of no return on this. And so, often the ability to execute something within, especially something new, within your field of vision sort of starts by having the essential ingredients. And, unfortunately in our culture, money is an essential ingredient, but it was important to us that this wasn't a conference or a gathering that was just accessible to people who could afford to pay the price of admission. So the big impetus for going out and finding the sponsorship was to break down some barriers. We were also asking people to come to this thing and to whatever extent possible, commit a full week. Having this sort of be a residential camp-like experience was part of what we wanted to create. That people weren't just going off to the restaurant or going off to the bar or the pub or going home to their families in the evening. That it was really about creating, more than a moment around the community that was formed. It was applying some business principles up front that allowed us to execute that, and also make the conference or the gathering available to people that would not have been able to pay the full price. But we housed people well, we fed people very well, and those are just sort of dignified elements that create safety and create community and create the opportunity for us to just be authentic. And I think that's something very different than the run-of-the-mill type conferences and gatherings that we shuffle in and out of.
And I can pick up on that, PJ, because I agree with everything you said, and I feel quite emotional, really, connecting in today and going back to that space. But it was that kind of passionate emotion about we need something that's going to generate an ongoing sense of social action and change, but and keeping that enthusiasm alive came in our relationship. The three of us and Stephanie came in that fortnightly meeting where we just, I remember Stephanie and I thinking, oh, thank goodness for PJ and Oryx, they kind of know what they're doing, which I'm not really sure now that you did, because we hadn't all done this before. But it was that kind of back and forward of, oh, we can rely on these guys to know what they're doing here. So the vision statement got shaped over a few weeks, because that was the first important thing, so we could articulate, as you say, what our passion was that people could understand. And just on the tickets thing, we gave 50% of tickets away at cost price or for free. And it's pretty well known around that if you put on big events and it's a ticket selling one, you need to sell 80% of tickets to break even. Well, we did that by, you guys came over from America for, there was no profit in this, but there was a deep, long-lasting profit in ourselves, and that was the connections we made. So that feels important. I wonder if it's a good time to just quickly read a bit of what Stephanie said, which might set it up a bit more, because I think she spoke to a bit of this. Is that all right? So this is
sounds good. We want to hear from Stephanie.
This is from Stephanie, who was the other organizer with us all, Stephanie Mitchell, who she and I were in business together for a long time. She's set up IFS project in Adelaide, South Australia now, and is doing some leading work in that. But she wrote to us and said, look, the things that were most important to me about Reawaken was the space was held and the collective vision of those who organized and attended. And I think whilst we're talking about the organization, it was also the commitment of everyone that attended. I think the people who came along really wanted to connect from the heart and brought themselves to the experience in vulnerability and authenticity. And that seems to be two key things. It was a special time where the planning for how the event would be held, the home groups, expressive opportunities and inner explanation during the workshop portions of the conference made for a remarkable and unique experience. And what she's talking about there was the keynote presentations were 20 minutes, 25 minutes long, followed by a whole group experiential exercise. So I think almost all the keynotes offered the whole 110 people there the opportunity to use the information from the keynote to do an action or an intention. Who knew 110 people would come and find safety together and be willing to be so open and self-reflective and allow themselves to be taken on a journey of thinking about what they really want to see change in their little worlds and make plans for that. And just to say, she said, it was a sublime thing, and the intention and prep and team who were willing to be vulnerable themselves was the thing that made the difference, I think. Anyway, so you can see for her a year or so later, the memory is the commitment that we made to each other and then all the participants made who came along.
All right. So we want to move this along. We want to give you a sense of it. We also want to get to the interactive pieces as well. And you can see how just enthusiastic we are about the experience because we did all this planning, and then we get to the conference, and what's that going to look like after a year of planning? And this is the first night, or a few photos from the first night, which also involves some poetry reading and music. But one of the main things I took away from the conference was the fact that Australia does a lot better job of recognizing Indigenous people and creating relationships with Indigenous people. When we have meetings here, we just don't. We don't do that. We don't recognize that we sit on Indigenous lands, and we don't recognize those people, and we definitely don't invite them in. And maybe I'll let Matt talk about this a bit more, but because he has formed a relationship with this group. But I found this first night and this opening one of the most powerful parts of the whole experience for me. And I'm trying to bring this back, especially when we have in-person meetings, is to acknowledge the Indigenous folks who on whose land that we sit. So Matt, did you want to say a few more words about this?
Yeah, look, I can speak, and maybe it's a good time to acknowledge where I'm coming from. I live on Ghana land, which is the land of the traditional people here, the custodians of the country where I live. There's many different First Peoples countries in Australia, but where we live is the Ghana lands. And Yelika is a mob of one of the elders of the Ghana people. He's the son of a senior Ghana elder, Auntie Georgina, and they have supported young people to start retelling and relearning the stories of the wisdom of the First Peoples here. So on the first night, we were extremely fortunate to have Yelika come along and do a traditional welcome to country. So if you don't know, in Australia, I would do an acknowledgement. I acknowledge where I am. I acknowledge I'm on the land that's never been ceded. Colonization happened here and genocide happened here, but the land has never been given over, and it's still owned by the wonderful spirit and people that live here now. It was just very powerful to have them come, and they did a fire ceremony for us. So they set up a traditional fire and invited us to understand a little more about the culture of which we were being welcomed to take part in. And one of the favorite things, Carl, the leader of the thing, he said the language Nickety Jinna. If you learn nothing else, you can learn some Aboriginal language from Ghana country. Nickety Jinna means sort of bare feet on the ground. So if you want to get connected to the earth and the spirit, you can take your shoes and socks off and be Nickety Jinna. Yeah.
That's right. And I ended up doing, a lot of people ended up doing their keynotes and presentations, Nickety Jinna, and being more connected to the earth. Okay, so let's get to the next one. If you read the ebook, you're welcome to read some of this. I'm going to skip ahead. I will say on the first, towards the beginning of the conference, one of my memories is that first day when the organizers kind of introduced the conference. We talked about the experience that we wanted to have. And we talked about that we have over 100 leaders here. We actually wanted to cap it at 100. We went to 110 for the week. And so we saw every person there as an equal contributor and a leader. And Matt mentioned this with the individual that he spoke of. And there was all kinds of different people who had never been to a conference, people who struggled being around other people that for 2 or 3 days just were outside smoking and waving and talking to people if that's what they felt comfortable doing. And we had some therapists and professionals and just a diverse group, but every 110 of those people were equal leaders. And that's what we said the first night. We actually said, if there's an issue or a problem, probably the best person not to go to is one of the organizers, because we're fried. We're working, long hours, and go to each other. Like if there's issues and problems, we're a community. We can address these and solve these together. And it was amazing how people just picked up on that. And it was just about equal human beings coming together, no matter what your role was in life. It was really beautiful.
Yeah, Oryx, can I just say,
yeah.
One thing that I noticed on that, and it reminded me because I was looking at the pre-apocalypse literature, leaders emerged, people who didn't know they were leaders and didn't imagine they were going to be leaders. What you were saying about, rather than coming to the organizers, go to the person next to you, go to the person you've been sitting with, listening to the talks, enact what's been spoken and shared in the community. And certainly that's one of the ripple effects in South Australia, is that we've got people who had never seen themselves being a peer to someone else in their life. And since Reawaken, they've gone on and done their qualifications or their exams or whatever in peer work or mental health work. And it came from the fact that when someone at Reawaken was isolated, distressed, whatever, there was a natural process of reaching out, and from that, there is 2 people I know that have gone on to do peer work and mental health work training because of the experiences they had there. And this is the sort of thing that we were hoping for. Don't ask the people that you don't need the leaders of the conference to do it. Become your own leaders as community.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in and acknowledge, and I also want to acknowledge we've had a couple of people join us sort of as we've progressed here. So, also a bit of a digression. I think what we're hoping to impart to you as part of this program is, what were the mechanics and the elements of something that was like a conference that wasn't quite a conference that we produced that's replicable. Because I think what we're talking about here is creating intentional community. And so, everything from keeping a cost down and making sure there aren't barriers to how many people attend, to wanting, and what is that number where it just doesn't, if it gets too big, you lose something. to how is the program organized to allow for things like downtime? How are the presentations structured to allow for interactivity? How are you, or how are we as organizers being thoughtful about and intentional around the conditions that we're creating? And I think that the reason that we feel so passionate about sharing the model, and Matt's done a lot of this in South Australia since the conference, and there have been little Reawaken events, is that we believe that we sort of in effect did what we intended to do. That the proof was in the pudding, so to speak, and that there were sort of endless anecdotes of people having the experience that we intended. And what I would love to insert here is just an acknowledgement specifically to Matt and to Steph about, as organizers, I don't want to say leaders, but as organizers, I think one thing you can do is model how you want to engage with each other. And there was a really beautiful moment the first day of the conference where Matt and Stephanie were in front of this room full of almost 100 or more people. There's all this anticipation. There's been all this lead up. And, Matt, maybe you want to articulate how the interaction went down. But, essentially, Steph was like, how are you doing? And Matt's like, I'm not doing that good right now, or something along those lines. And there was a vulnerability that was expressed. There was a humanity that was expressed that I believe sort of right off the bat set the tone for the rest of the week. And so you're in a room, you're looking up to these people or towards these people as, as tell me what to do, or as or show me the way. And they're acknowledging they're just you. Do you want to speak to that moment, Max? I know it's something you and Steph and I talked about.
Yeah, look, thanks. I mean, again, it's emotional to think about it. It was as you described. It was about, we talk about authenticity, we talk about being who we are, but I think that was what it was about. At 5 minutes before we started this event, we'd brought speakers from across the world. We'd brought a community together. There was a lot of anticipation about whether this was how it was going to evolve. And PJ was there, and Ben was there helping set up all the recording equipment, and the whole power board blew out. So all the lights went because there was too much equipment plugged in. And what do you, I ask anyone who's organizing anything, whether it's a gathering of friends for a coffee or a whole conference, what do you do when something like that happens? Do you turn to the person next to you and say, look, we're in this, how's it going? Or do you kind of pretend that that it hasn't happened? And so for me, it was about, right, we've done this, we've achieved making this event happen. There's no option other than to be fully in the room, fully in the space. And I think it did set the tone, PJ. And I think one of the things that Steph and I really were keen on, and that was built in, is that after every session in the morning and the afternoon, everyone was put into small groups. And so you could reflect on what you'd heard together. So there was this intentional sit individually and listen, and then come into a group and reflect. And what that did was from day one allowed everyone to start sharing how they were feeling rather than what they were thinking. We can all go away and think about it later, but first of all, we need to come together as an emotional community. So, yeah. Yeah,
and we called those home groups. The home groups was a really, I think, essential part of the conference. So that this was the same group that you would meet with at different parts, basically every break. And you'll see some photos of the home groups connecting. I also just want to acknowledge that, yes, PJ and I assisted, but it's always the on the ground people that are doing the most work. And so Matt and Steph, and they actually assembled a local committee that met, I think, almost every week. Yep. to plan this. So there was another organizing group of local community people that were a big part of this.
Yeah, and two things on that. One is that local organizing community were people broadly of lived experience, not people that were necessarily peer workers, but people that had come to this because they had been touched in their lives, as most of us have, by the deep experiences of living, whether that's trauma, mental health, addiction, or identity or whatever. But we also went into home groups. The organizing group, the whole big organizing group, when everyone else went into home groups, we also sat in a room, and it was confronting but held in a space of compassion. You know, so there was some days where those home groups, we kind of sat down and went, what's happening? What's happening? You know what? Other days we just kind of sat down in a connected, loving space. But yeah, so we joined in as organizers. We stopped for half an hour or an hour twice a day to connect, just like everybody else. The intention was there was no great us and them. It was just, we're all here walking through the experience together. So.
Okay. By the way, I think people are starting to get a feel for this. So let's get through the ebook fairly quickly because we're running out of time. And then because we want to give people a chance to you can meet each other in your own groups here pretty soon. So again, this is the ebook for people tuning in late. This is the Reawaken E-Book, which can be found on the website, which was posted in the chat. We can post it again. That photo of me was at Meaningful Actions at the end of the conference, where we went to the Parliament building, basically, in South Australia, Adelaide, and we did a rally, an action. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Another meaningful action that came out of this was a manifesto. And because of time considerations, we probably won't read the whole thing, but this manifesto is amazing. It's on the Reawaken website. We encourage you to read the whole thing. And more importantly, maybe we need more groups starting to adopt this manifesto, or saying, you know, we live by the values of the Reawaken manifesto. This is a huge meaningful action that came out of the conference, and it's based on our collective experience over that week. And I really think it can be a roadmap for how we approach this work. And there's a great story about how that was even written, but I don't know if we'll get there. We have lots of stories to tell you. Again, here are the keynotes. We handpicked the keynotes, who was going to deliver these. Again, short presentations, making sure that most of that was interactive. Again, lots of downtime and breaks. Here's myself and PJ arriving from the other side of the world. This is right before the conference. Right before the conference starts. We're actually smiling, connected. Yes, stressed, but because we've created that relationship with each other, we're happy. I think that rubbed off on the rest of the folks who attended. They could see that the organizers were relaxed, happy, and that rubbed off. And this is our art space where we did 2 projects, the meeting manual and turning point, which we'll say a little bit more about. And this was a very used space of the conference. Lots of people came in here, and you'll see some of the creations that people came up with.
Just to say on the last page, there was an image of you, Oryx. When you'd arrived, Oryx arrived off a long plane flight, and we were preparing for the conference. So down in the bottom left-hand corner, gone back an extra page, but and so we began enacting down in the bottom left-hand corner. We did a check-in the moment Oryx arrived, really, and that was like a little mini home group. It was an open dialogue informed space, really, where you just go around and check in, and that, you know, that happened all the way through this, from preparations to finish. And just on the art space, the other thing, we'll see photos, but there was also a lot of outside space. So we embraced the environment. This wasn't as Oryx or PJ said, this wasn't in a hotel in a city. This was in a beautiful environment, but including the external environment, the outside space. And that was well used throughout the conference. That one of the scenes that I remember most was people sitting around in nature, being connected. Yeah.
And also in terms of the program, we intentionally left a lot of downtime. It was meaningful to us that people weren't just like running from keynote to workshop to lunch to keynote to workshop. We really wanted people to be able to process information. We wanted them to be able to digress with one another, take a walk. So again, a lot of this comes back to the design. How do you have the intention in the design of something like this that creates the space or creates the connection or enables whatever it is you're trying to enable. And so for us, that was a critical ingredient, was making sure that people didn't feel rushed, and making sure that people didn't feel overwhelmed. And there's, as many of you know, there's a lot of, there can be some heavy moments in these types of learnings, so we wanted to make sure that people had the full opportunity to connect with each other outside of the mechanics of the program.
On that, sorry, one of the things, I know we're going to get to the program, but we also had spaces on the program where people attending could run impromptu workshops. And that was a really important thing. If you were inspired by something during the conference, you could just approach one of the organizers and they would support you to set up a workshop. So we had a template of how to run a workshop if you'd never run one before. And we even had someone who was very upset and disgruntled with something happening. And so she came to me to tell me about it. And I said, well, why don't you do this on stage? So after lunch, we waited and we had the conversation on stage where she was able to kind of say, look, this doesn't feel right, So it was very much about keeping space, as you say, in the program for the impromptu stuff that allowed it to evolve organically.
Yeah, so here you can see some photos on the right of the home groups meeting, which happened throughout. And some more photos. Again, this theme of circles. So like in the bottom right, we would often meet as a whole group in a circle. The bottom left is one of the film presentations and dialogues. And Matt mentioned the outdoors. It was in a beautiful retreat setting, and this is where you could find people a lot of the time. Look, more circles, even outside, just naturally forming, creating space for connection. And one of those was just really simple, that the Humane Clinic and Matt came up with, was just listening sessions. Just listening, I think you call it. And someone would volunteer to sit at the just listening place, and someone could come and sit down with them and talk, and the person there would just listen. Or maybe they'd have a conversation if that's what they wanted. So just listening was a part of it. And just lots of opportunities for people to kind of connect naturally. As you can see, we had a film crew there, as well as featuring some films. We actually did a lot of filming, so there will be a Reawaken film released at some point. PJ. Just some pictures of the connection throughout the week. You can get a sense of the compassion and the love that was created. Impromptu Reawaken Awards. There's Tracy Booth, who became, an editor of this book, and a big contributor to the conference up in the upper right. Oh, and here's pictures of the den. This is where the organizers stayed. We stayed on, I think this is important. We stayed on site. All the organizers stayed on site. There was PJ's family there as well, which was beautiful. And we got here's where we got a lot of work done. And so we didn't leave and come back. We were really embedded in this community for a week, living there for a week. And this was called the Den because it was in the basement of the place. And we had special bond time there. I mean, I shared a room with Matt. More pictures of outside. Here's one of the presenters requested balloons, Indigo Daya. She's a wonderful organizer, presenter from Australia. And so we had like hundreds of these balloons pop here to find the evidence for psychiatry. And it was in her favorite color. We had a really interactive, fun workshop here. There were some pictures of staying asleep or reawakening, the awake crew, or staying asleep. Which would you rather do?
I think on the importance of those balloons about pop here for the evidence of psychiatry for me was that you know, I said to Indy, what do you want? You know, I was pretending she was like a diva who wanted special things, and that's what she said. But because of the spirit of the event, we were able to adapt like that. So a range of things happened through the week that we were able to adapt to. So when we get to the photos of the rally in a moment, I think it's the next few pages, you know, we had a very small burning ceremony on the steps of Parliament. And, you know, those things can't happen. But actually in Ghana land, it's the rights of the people, the First Nation people, to have a smoking ceremony on the steps of Parliament. So there was all these impromptu things that are possible when you create the spirit of connection and community. And you know, when we're talking about a conference here and trying to just introduce you, that was what was different for me, was that the whole thing was couched in, let's do what people are asking for and what people need in this space, rather than us telling people a prescriptive plan. And that would be my key message out of this, is that anyone that wants to organize something like this, it is about setting up the spirit of what you're doing, so that when someone says, can we do this? And you go, yeah, find your crew and do it. You know, and that was where the idea of the balloons came from. Was Indy said, can we have purple balloons with this writing on? Yeah, of course you can. It's not in the budget, but we'll do it.
Yeah. So let's get through the rest of these really quickly, and we're going to break you up into groups because we want to see what you come up with. Hopefully you're inspired after seeing this, but there could be some more inspiration in the rest of the ebook. So I'm just going to go through this very quickly, and we'll get you into groups, and then we'll come back and we'll close this thing off. So as Matt mentioned, again, look at the circles on the left. The last action we did was a rally on the Parliament steps. And it's not necessarily in the Australian, at least the South Australian nature, to be, you know, rah, rah, let's go. So this was definitely kind of a bit counterculture. But I can tell you what, it was a life-changing experience for everyone who, I think, boarded those vans and went and did it. It brought us together. We had people walking by who were like, what are people doing protesting in Australia? Who joined us and said, yeah, I want to be more connected. I don't like how the mental health system is working. There were people crying and hugging. We had leaders. We had Parliament leaders who were on board with us, and we handed out the manifesto there. So those are just a few pictures of the rally. Quickly going to go through the
Oryx, importantly, on the Parliament steps, we had two people. This couldn't have been made up. We had commuters, business people walking up and down, and we're telling them what we're protesting about. We had a member of Parliament come and receive the manifesto for compassionate change on the steps of Parliament. Me and PJ got into the Parliament and handed it up to the administrator to give to the Minister for Health. And then, most important for me, two people turned up who had been incarcerated and manhandled in a psychiatric facility the week before, and they'd heard that the member for Parliament was going to be on the steps with our rally, and they came up and they remonstrated and spoke to the member about the injustices of the mental health system. And she, the member, had the courage to stand there and listen. And that summed up Reawaken for me. When you have two marginalized young women who've been battered and bruised in psychiatry can turn up at an event like this at the end of a week and be supported to have their voice heard at Parliament, Yeah, that gets me fired up, because that was the other side of the compassion. That's what compassion facilitated.
Mm. So I'm just going to go quickly through the images of the art projects, and some things will probably definitely stand out to you, and I might read just a few things as we get through this. But very briefly, the two projects were the meaning manual, which is basically a rewriting of the DSM. So we ordered a bunch of DSMs, diagnostic statistical manuals, and I was like, what are we doing ordering DSMs? But you'll see what we were doing. And then the Turning Point project, documenting, sometimes there's a turning point in our lives, so documenting change and transformation in our lives. So let's just go quickly. You'll see some of this beautiful artwork. Psychotic disorders not elsewhere classified, otherwise known as. So taking this DSM and just making it your own. DSM, dis my spirit. She needed to disappear to stay alive. How is that a disorder? Love is love is love is love. In the middle of the desert, sometimes you pray you'll run out of water. I see you. How about you listen to the little girl who was raped, caged, and made to believe she was nothing? She survived. It's just really powerful. So I recommend you go through this book in detail. So these are the this is the meaning manual, kind of rewriting the DSM. I survived some fucked up shit. And we'll get to some of the images from the Turning Point. As you can see how much people participated in this.
As you're going through the images, Oryx, Deb Jorgensen said this would have been amazing to be there and do. And part of this presentation and part of the ebook is about saying, take what you want from this. There's no copyright on this stuff, take it and run with it. And I wonder how, as a community, a bigger community here, we could all support that to happen in America or anywhere else.
Right. Yeah, we want you to take it and run. The website is yours. All of this material is yours to create more of these. As you can see, we're very passionate about our experience. This was life-changing, transformative experiences for each of us, and for all the 110 people that were a part of this. And we want more of this to happen. Yes, it's more difficult now when we can't be in person. We're not going to sugarcoat that. This needs to happen in person, actually. So this is kind of a seed. We can do pieces of this online, but you're not really going to get the power of it until we can really gather again in person. So hopefully this inspires that. When will this happen? When can we get together again like this?
Well, the good news is that it takes at least 6 months to organize something like this. So, you got a nice runway for it. But what I think some of these, like seeing this art and hearing the stories and reflecting on the rally, I think part of what we're not saying this is the way to do this. We're saying here are some ideas, here are some elements of something we believe was different. Like Matt's saying, take what you want, but there is no formula for this. People can put their own stamps on this, but from the jump, it was important to us that this was something different. That this was not just a conference, that this was not just content and keynotes. And I think what's really beautiful looking at it from sort of a bird's eye view here is you see this fusion of community, of activism, of art, of intention, of content, and so it's all those things. And when you can bring those things together and bring the right group of people together, I think the possibilities are limitless in terms of what materializes out of that space.
So yeah, right now we're into the turning point art project. So I'm going to leave you with this image where this person's turning point is so beautiful. I think going from I am evil to I am hurt, and this is the difference in the artwork here. But right now, I think we've given you enough of a flavor. We want to break you up into some groups of 3, and you're going to be in a group for about 5 minutes. And here are some questions to consider that we can put in the chat as well. Why did you decide to attend today? What resonates with you about the Reawaken concept? Again, remember, connection, compassion, meaningful action, all the things that we've talked about. How is this different from what is typically done? And how would you like to carry this model forward? Would you like to carry this model forward in your community, and how? So let's get to some meaningful action right here today in an hour and a half. So in your group of 3, how would you like to carry this forward? This could be in your personal life. This could be in your work life. You want to organize something big. You want to organize something small. You want to organize something online. How do you want to carry this forward? So I'm going to break you into groups of 3.
Yeah, Oryx and Ben is mentioning that 5 minutes might be a little tight to it's 4:42. Why don't we give people about 8 to 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
And then bring them back to just do if each group could have one sort of one person that could just sort of report back some thoughts and ideas that came up. That would be a great way to wind this down.
Yeah, and you can report back in the chat as well. All right, so there will be actually 3 to 4 participants. You'll have 3 or 4 people in your room. So now the rooms are being created, so just go to your room, introduce yourself to the other people, connect, and you can hopefully address some of these questions for about 10 minutes. So go ahead and go to your breakouts. And PJ and Matt, you can stay here. We'll have our own breakout.
Yeah, I think Matt joined the group, so we could do one right here
Right.
with everyone that didn't join another group. In Oryx, it might be really helpful, super quick, if you just broadcast a message to those groups with those questions. Do you know how to do that?
Yep. Yeah, I do that.
Great. We have some folks in here who didn't join groups, but I think for the moment we don't need to facilitate. We can just hold off for another 5 minutes or so and then bring them back.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's freedom of choice to not join the group.
Well, I'm so glad that Matt joined. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else is in the screen? Just scroll through the rest of the ebook here. I'm just looking to see if there's anything. Maybe you could end the screen share.
Well, I have to. Oh yeah. End the screen share. Yeah.
I'm just curious. Just scroll through the last 30 pages. I don't think I've ever really even scrolled through this full thing.
There's some just listening sidewalk. Yeah. There's the bios.
Yeah.
Some good photos of the rally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think they get it, you know?
Yeah, right.
You know, so go back to that. Yeah. No, what was the one before that? Was there one before that? Yeah, I would yeah, this one. Suki. Leave that up. Because I think we want to hear from people for 5 to 8, 6 to 8 minutes. And then just acknowledge that, part of the intention with this was to have ripples, right? For there to be ripples. And I think we should hand it back to Matt to let him talk about what some of those things have been in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, good idea.
Yeah,
there's actually 4 of these articles in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so scan through those perhaps, and then, and then direct people to the website because there's more of this. They can watch the keynotes. There's an action. They can download the ebook. They can read the manifesto. Right. I mean, really just I think this is one of the coolest elements is there's all this evidence of action, right? Of residual effects that came out of this thing. So let's direct them there. But I think it would be really good for Matt to articulate some of what has actually come from Reawaken on the ground in Australia, because that's what we hope, would happen sort of locally, regionally. This isn't a, 100 people gathering is not going to change the world. But, in terms of like infecting your local community, your regional community, like it has a real effect.
Yeah. So I think maybe we just read a few of the chats too, so we don't have time for a lot of report backs.
Okay.
But we could read some of the chat.
Great.
So yeah, because it's basically going to be next step.
Well, it's 4:49. Why don't you broadcast them a message and say we're closing the breakout groups in a minute. If you could post your some thoughts from your group into the chat, we would greatly appreciate it.
Okay, I'm gonna close the rooms.
Yep.
So they'll be all kicked out in a minute.
Excuse me.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. In about 10 seconds, everybody will be disrupted from their connections.
Hey, well, we're about... Oh, darn it.
Okay, so people should be back now. One of the beauties of Zoom is that it's a lot easier to get people to come back because we can blame Zoom, not us disrupting your connection. So we only have about 10 more minutes. So we are going to take your comments and next steps. We really want to focus on ripples and next steps. What do you want to do with this? If you want to chat about or comment about anything else, you're welcome to. And we'll read a few of those chats. But given the time we have, we're just going to focus on next steps from here. And on the website, the Reawaken website, we call those Reawaken ripples, because the experience has a lot of ripple effects. And so the last 4 pages of the book are articles by attendees and mentioning some of the ripples that this has created. And Matt, we wanted to give you a chance, since this is local Australia, to maybe talk about a few of those ripples that are happening as a result of this conference, this experience.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Oryx. First, I just want to acknowledge the people I met with. It was beautiful, and to feel so connected globally just by doing this event. But yeah, look, what's happened in our community, Reawaken has become a narrative that stood for the alternative. And some of the things that have happened, we've developed a podcast, which isn't about the conference, but it was in the spirit of the conference, where we sit around and talk. We don't talk about disorders and treatments. We talk about people's life journeys around what we call addiction or mental health or trauma. The Just Listening community has built, and actually someone has bought us a building, and we will open up this emergency department alternative in November, run entirely by community volunteers. And that is in the spirit of Reawaken. That is about saying community can support community. So what we touched on about, if someone was having a difficult time, you reach out to the person next to you. That is one of the big ripples from Reawaken for me, is that we are now opening a whole community where people won't need to access mental health services. They just reach into a community for support. And equally, it gives the community an opportunity to reach out to those that are asking for support. So that's been really important. We'll show Recovering Addiction, the film, when it comes out, from PJ and his community. And that's been another thing. We've continued to show films and then have conversations. We had a Reawaken Revisited, where we had a conference and revisited some of this and brought people together. And probably the most profound thing is that the manifesto hangs in our building, and people read it regularly. And what amazes me is that if you can get this manifesto in front of people, even people that you wouldn't imagine, so policymakers, financial business people, the manifesto makes sense. And that's been one of the ripples for me, is that it's brought a community together and given us a central focus to ripple out again. So we've kind of come in together, dropped the stone, and then it's just people are talking about it. And that's part of why the website is for free, because we don't want to own this. We want to make sure that it just keeps going.
And I think one of these ideas this idea of meaningful action was a phrase we kept on coming back to. So, we call these reawaken ripples because they're the residual impacts of the experience that was created. But, as a core of social organizing, I think that meaningful action is an important thing because it's about having the intention of creating something that isn't just itself, and then everyone moves on with their life. It's about creating, and I believe that we did this with the film Healing Voices. I believe we did this with Reawaken, and the proof is on the website. If you look at all of these things that came out of it, from the book to people's personal responses to other events that Matt has been able to produce in Australia, to things that have happened to people in their own personal lives. There's to the keynotes being available, and shareable content in the world. Eventually a documentary, I promise, guys. But the point is that it's important to have that intention as social organizers about, we're going to put all of our time, effort, heart into doing something. What do we hope comes out of it? And I think all too often, these experiences or these moments of real connection, of real powerful advocacy they're sort of left there. And so I think the challenge in terms of social action and social organizing is taking something that has meaning and intention and then making sure that something else comes out of it. And I think that this was an example of that.
Yeah, and I'll just add that what's next is up to you. If this resonated with you, like PJ and Matt have said, all this material is open source. It's yours. It's all there. To recreate this in your community in whatever ways you feel like needs to happen. We did it with our own style and our own way, and you can do this with, and add your touch. If you think that something was missing or something was off, then you can create this in the way that you want to create it. I also want to acknowledge Peerpocalypse, because we talked in the beginning about acknowledging Indigenous people, and yesterday that happened with the opening ceremony of Peerpocalypse. So thank you, Peerpocalypse. Thank you, Peerpocalypse, for having us in being able to present this model. And yeah, people are chiming in all over the chat that this has resonated with you, and if it has, then create something. And we're here as resources. Like, I work with National Empowerment Center. I want to be able to support you in organizing something like this in your community. So don't hesitate to reach out to National Empowerment Center to get support in doing this. We have some of the things that I don't think are on the website, like sponsor templates, for example. Some of the nitty-gritty stuff, like how do you get the different levels of sponsorship and what comes with each package. We've created all that kind of stuff already, so we're happy to share anything that you might want if you want to create something like this. And it doesn't have to be a full week. We did a full week. We just said, to really form a relationship, we felt like we needed that time together. You could do something very connected in 1 or 2 days. Sometimes a week is just not feasible. And again, we talked about this really needs to be in person, but I think there are some aspects of it that you can apply to doing some online stuff too, currently.
And just to dovetail on that, Oryx, I think that, we're acknowledging that so much of this was about being together, was about being connected. It sort of feels like a bit punishing to think about how beautiful that moment was, as we are now in this COVID moment where we're all very isolated. But again, these things take significant time, significant runway, significant planning. And I think there's going to be obviously a tremendous need for this type of connection on the other side of this, because we will be on the other side of this. And so, it's never too early to start planning for something like this. And this might be an antidote for how we reintegrate into community on the other end of this COVID moment. So it's food for thought. Thanks, everyone.
I suppose my thing, Winston made a point that, you know, we have to be a bit careful who the leaders are and how that's operating. And I suppose my response to that is be the leader in your own community, you know, and get a group of people to come together. And that's one way that we can move away from, as we talked about earlier, the people convening this becoming the leaders of it. We came together as a community. We just set the sparks alight, if you like. And I think that's really important. And I just want to mention one other person. Ben Cohen flew from New York to this event and gave his own time and energy to help the production of all the stuff. And I know he's your cousin, PJ, but this guy was this unidentified gem of spirit who just turned up and people fell in love with. So Ben Cohen, if you ever bump into a guy in New York called Ben Cohen that sits doing computer stuff a lot, he's got this amazing heart that he just gives. So if we find those people in our communities, the sparks come alight, you know.
And Ben's also, you know, one of the contributors to Healing Voices and working with me on the next film, Recovering Addiction. And, you know, to your point, Matt, about leadership, you know, I think that one of the important principles is also to engage everyone who is there as a leader. That it's not about us and them. It's not about a leadership cohort and the attendees. That it's about if you engage a room of 110 people individually as leaders, that can be empowering.
Yeah, I'm feeling emotional right now because I'm reliving this Reawaken experience and seeing all these other beautiful faces online. And I don't want to say goodbye, even on Zoom. So I wish everyone, but we do have to say goodbye because there's other things going on at the conference and there's other things going on in our lives. But this is being recorded, so there will be a recording of this if you want to, if you missed some of it, if you want to listen again and take a look at the ebook again, which you can also just go to the website and look at the ebook at your own leisure. I recommend really just reading it at your own pace. But yeah, I look forward to the next time we can do this in person. Yeah. Reawaken USA is next. or reawaken whoever is organizing one in your community, whatever you want to call it. We want more reawakens. So we all need to reawaken. So thank you. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, you.
Everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers, peace, and love.
Thank you.
Love.
Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Juliet, were you able to get my background?